Episode 3: Ashes of Utopia. The silence after devastation was unlike anything humanity had ever known. For centuries, humanity had grown accustomed to the background hum of expansion. Orbital elevators buzzing with cargo traffic, slipstream lanes flashing with ships threading between colonies, and the endless chatter of interplanetary transmissions filled with the optimism of a species forever climbing upward. But now, that symphony of progress was muted. In its place, there was the stillness of smoke drifting from ruined habitats, the emptiness of darkened space stations, and the quiet sob of a civilization staring at the graves of its ideals. The Elythian betrayal had not been a single strike, but a campaign of precision. Colonies, once vibrant with life, were shattered in days. Agricultural satellites that had fed millions burned into atmospheric streaks over Mars. Orbital platforms that had provided energy to entire cities became twisted husks, tumbling endlessly through the void. On Earth itself, the cradle of humanity, entire nations mourned as news broadcasts showed fragments of orbital habitats streaking across the skies, each piece a falling tombstone of Utopia. The Terran Accord recorded its first official death toll as a warfaring civilization, 2 billion lives lost in the opening campaigns, and for the first time in a millennium, human culture as a whole spoke the language of mourning. Memorials rose across every continent, hastily carved from rubble and steel, but even these became overwhelmed. Grief was too vast, too widespread to be captured by monuments. Humanity was not merely counting the dead, it was counting the days until its own annihilation. Yet in the ashes, something stirred. The Accord, once a beacon of collaboration and peace, realized that the only way forward was transformation. There would be no rescue, no ally to arrive with fleets of aid. The galaxy had turned away, and so the Terran Accord made the choice. It would become its own savior. The shift was immediate, brutal, and absolute. The councils of governance dissolved the last remnants of utopian restraint, issuing decrees that redirected every resource of civilization toward one singular goal: survival through war. Factories once producing habitation domes were stripped and retooled to hammer out armor plating. Agricultural colonies were reorganized, rationing strictly enforced, with surplus crops redirected to feed the vast armies of engineers, miners, and technicians pressed into service. Universities and cultural academies, once dedicated to philosophy, art, and interstellar diplomacy, were turned into war colleges and training centers. Knowledge was no longer a luxury, it was a weapon. And from the ashes of their old world, humanity began to build the machinery of its defense. The first to emerge were the Aegis-class escort frigates. They were not elegant, nor were they symbols of grand engineering. They were fast, cheap, and mercilessly pragmatic. Thousands of civilian freighters and mining haulers were stripped of their cargo bays, their hulls clad with armor scavenged from decommissioned stations, and their engines pushed to overdrive. Railguns, once relegated to asteroid mining, were repurposed into forward-facing cannons, each capable of shredding enemy fighters at close range. Missile bays were crammed into their undersides, designed for saturation fire rather than precision. The Aegis frigates became the shield of humanity, and their name was chosen with deliberate irony. These were not shields of peace or law. They were shields of steel, intercepting death with more death. They filled the void around vulnerable colonies, darting between larger enemy craft to draw fire, buying precious seconds for civilians to escape or for defenses to lock on target. What the Aegis lacked in longevity, it made up for in numbers. The Accord built them in swarms, releasing them into space like a new breed of predator born from the wreckage of freighters. But frigates alone could not win a war. Humanity needed weapons designed not for defense, but for the art of destruction. Thus were born the Hammerfall-class destroyers. For these, humanity did not cannibalize old civilian ships. These were the first vessels designed purely for war since the Accord's founding. Their hulls bristled with heavy rail batteries, their undersides studded with torpedo bays, their engines optimized for sudden bursts of acceleration that allowed them to dart into enemy formations, unleash devastation, and vanish before return fire could pin them down. The Hammerfall was humanity's first true sword in the void. Their creation was a turning point, not merely technological, but psychological. Aegis frigates were born of desperation. Hammerfalls were born of intention. They declared to the galaxy and to the Elythians that humanity was no longer a victim clawing at survival. It was a predator sharpening its claws. Yet the Elythians had proven in their opening strikes that mobility and firepower were not enough. Humanity needed bastions, immovable strongholds from which it could weather the storm. Thus, the Bulwark-class defense platforms were conceived. These were not ships, but orbital fortresses, some fashioned from the skeletal remains of destroyed habitats, others constructed from mined asteroids, hollowed and armored until they were little more than floating citadels. Each bulwark bristled with overlapping layers of point defense cannons, long-range particle arrays, and shield projectors designed to blanket entire sectors of space. Earth received the first and largest bulwarks, ringed like silent sentinels around the planet. Mars followed, then Luna, then the mining belts of Ceres and Vesta. Every surviving colony clamored for their own fortress, knowing that without them, they were little more than targets awaiting execution. The bulwarks symbolized humanity's new resolve. It would no longer leave its worlds naked before the storm. Every planet, every moon, every station would become a fortress, every orbit a gauntlet. But still, humanity hungered for more. The Elythians wielded cruisers and capital ships like executioner's blades, and until humanity matched them, survival would be temporary. Thus came the Ironclad-class cruisers. If the Aegis frigates were the shield and the Hammerfall destroyers the sword, then the Ironclads were the mailed fist. Built in the reawakened shipyards of Luna and the orbital rings of Mars, Ironclads were engineered not only for combat, but for endurance. Their modular designs allowed them to serve as carriers, artillery platforms, or command vessels. Their hulls were layered with adaptive armor plating, capable of dispersing particle fire, their reactors reinforced to withstand the punishment of protracted engagements. The Ironclads became the backbone of the Terran fleet. Their construction required sacrifices on a scale unimaginable in the Utopian age. Entire cities rationed power so that shipyards could operate at full capacity. Civilian transport fleets were grounded so that their engines could be stripped for cruiser reactors. Even the cultural academies, once sacred, donated their vaulted libraries and architectural masterpieces, melting down their alloys for hull plating. Humanity sacrificed its beauty for survival, and the Ironclads became the embodiment of that sacrifice. Vast, grim vessels, stripped of elegance, but overflowing with resilience. And then there was the Eclipse, the flagship. Where the other vessels were born of necessity, the Eclipse was born of defiance. It was more than a ship. It was a statement. Humanity had never before attempted a vessel of such magnitude. Stretching kilometers in length, its hull was a lattice of armored layers, reinforced with both human ingenuity and fragments of Elythian technology scavenged from battlefields. Its primary weapon, the particle lance, was experimental, a weapon that could pierce through shields and hull alike with a beam of focused energy. Its secondary arrays were rail batteries the size of skyscrapers, flanked by missile silos that could unleash storms across light minutes of space. The Eclipse was not only a weapon, but a fortress. Within its armored hull were living quarters for tens of thousands, command centers capable of coordinating entire fleets, and shield projectors powerful enough to wrap the ship in a cocoon of shimmering light. It was a moving citadel, a flagship that embodied the shift of humanity itself. Where once the Accord had built monuments of peace and art, now it built monuments of war. Its construction was humanity's most ambitious act since the colonization of Mars. Entire orbital stations were dismantled to supply its materials. Resource convoys stripped the asteroid belt bare. Colonists volunteered in droves, offering their labor to see it finished. Some even offered their lives, serving as test subjects for the dangerous new reactors and shielding technologies it required. To many, the Eclipse was more than a ship. It was a tombstone for the world they had lost, and a promise for the world yet to come. When it was unveiled, still incomplete, hanging in the shadow of Mars like a sleeping titan, the galaxy took notice. The Accord broadcast the images across every colony, and for the first time since the Elythian betrayal, humanity felt something deeper than grief. They felt awe. They felt unity. They felt that even in the ashes of Utopia, there could be fire. And in the darkness of space, the Elythians too took notice. The ships were ready before the people were. The Aegis frigates slipped first into the void, their hulls still bearing the marks of welders who had worked sleepless shifts to see them completed. They looked crude when compared to the smooth, organic contours of Elythian craft. To many, they resembled little more than slabs of steel bristling with improvised weaponry. But where the Elythians were sleek, the Aegis frigates were stubborn. Where Elythian ships glided like predators, the Aegis clawed and lunged like cornered beasts. Their ugliness was their truth. Humanity was not trying to impress the galaxy, it was trying to survive it. The first test came on the edges of Saturn's orbit. The Elythians had returned to finish what they had begun. A strike force of cruisers and escort vessels slipped into the system, aiming to dismantle the last remaining Titan refineries, vital to the construction of reactors for the Ironclads and the Eclipse itself. The Accord could not afford to lose them. And so, for the first time, humanity met the invaders not as fleeing prey, but as defenders. The swarm of Aegis frigates arrived first. They darted between Saturn's rings, using the ice and debris as cover, emerging in coordinated bursts to fire volleys of missiles into the enemy formation. Many were torn apart almost instantly, Elythian particle lances carved through their thin armor like paper. But for every frigate lost, another emerged from the shadows, releasing another salvo. It was not elegance, it was not strategy, it was attrition, pure and brutal. Humanity had learned that it could not yet outthink its enemy, but it could bleed it. The Elythians adjusted, pressing forward, lances firing in sweeping arcs. Yet as they focused on the frigates, the second wave arrived. Out of the darkness beyond Titan's orbit came the Hammerfall destroyers. Larger, faster, more deadly, they broke formation like wolves descending upon prey. Their heavy rail batteries ignited, piercing the armor of an Elythian escort and sending it spiraling into the rings below. Torpedoes streaked through the void, forcing Elythian ships to scatter. It was not a victory. Too many frigates were lost, too many destroyers crippled. But for the first time, the Elythians retreated before their task was complete. The Titan refineries survived. Humanity's engineers cheered, exhausted, from their bunkers on the icy moons. For the first time since peace had died, they had bought themselves a reprieve. Word of the defense spread across the colonies like fire. Images of Aegis frigates darting through Saturn's rings, of hammerfall destroyers cutting through Elythian escorts, became symbols of defiance. The Accord broadcast the footage to every settlement, every mining station, every survivor still clinging to the ruins of the outer colonies. The message was clear. Humanity could fight. Humanity could resist. But the cost of survival remained high. The Elythians returned in greater numbers, their fleets larger, their strategies more merciless. Each new incursion tested the limits of the Terran Accord's fledgling fleets. Aegis frigates were consumed in swarms, hammerfall destroyers pushed to the brink. Entire shipyards operated at full capacity, unable to match the rate of losses. And so the next line of defense was awakened. The first Bulwark Defense Platform came online in orbit above Luna. It was a grim sight, an armored citadel the size of a city, bristling with guns and shield projectors, rotating slowly like a fortress built for the void. When the Elythians attempted to pierce the Earth-Lunar corridor, they met not a vulnerable world, but a gauntlet of fire. The Bulwark's point defense cannons lit up the void, cutting down swarms of enemy drones. Its particle arrays unleashed bursts of energy that cracked even Elythian shields. For hours, the fortress stood, holding the line until reinforcements arrived, and with every fortress completed, the Accord grew bolder. Earth was soon ringed with them. Mars fortified, the asteroid belt seeded with silent citadels waiting to awaken. The Elythians began to understand that humanity was no longer soft prey to be culled. It was building teeth and fangs. But the true test came with the unveiling of the Ironclad cruisers. Their first deployment was in the defense of Vesta Station, a vital mining hub in the asteroid belt. Elythian warships descended in force, their lancers slicing through the Aegis screen, their drones overwhelming the hammerfalls. But then the Ironclads arrived. They did not dart or weave like frigates or destroyers. They advanced like walls of steel, slow but relentless. The first salvo of Elythian fire splashed across their shields, dispersing into harmless arcs. Then their rail batteries spoke, firing in synchronized rhythm, each slug punching holes through enemy hulls. The Ironclads moved methodically, forming a line between the enemy fleet and Vesta Station, absorbing punishment and returning it tenfold. For the first time, the Elythians encountered resistance that did not crumble. When the battle ended, Vesta Station still stood. The Ironclads limped back to dockyards for repairs, scarred but unbroken. Humanity's morale soared. The Accord had proven it could not only survive, but stand its ground. And yet, beneath the celebration, there was unease. Every victory came at immense cost. Every ship constructed drained resources from starving colonies. Every bulwark built meant another settlement left without power or supplies. Humanity was surviving, yes, but it was bleeding itself to do so. Still, the people rallied. They had little choice, and as the battles grew in scale, whispers spread of the unfinished colossus hanging in orbit around Mars, the Eclipse. Workers spoke of its vast hull, its experimental lance, its shield generators said to rival the strength of entire bulwarks. Soldiers dreamed of serving aboard it, of fighting beneath its banner. Civilians prayed it would be finished before the Elythians launched their next great assault. The Elythians, too, had noticed the growing Titan. Their scouting vessels lingered near Mars, probing defenses, testing response times. They understood, as humanity did, that the Eclipse was not just a ship, it was a turning point. Its completion would mark the end of humanity's transformation from prey into predator. And so, the galaxy held its breath, watching as the Terran Accord, once the peaceful heart of interstellar diplomacy, hammered itself into a war machine. The Utopia was gone, reduced to ash. But from that ash, something new was rising. The Eclipse was not launched. It was unleashed. For months, the half-finished Colossus had hung in the shipyards above Mars, its skeletal frame a silent promise, its incomplete hull a reminder of humanity's fragility. Workers had died in droves completing it, from accidents in zero-G, from exhaustion, from Elythian raids that struck the shipyards again and again. Yet each time, repairs continued, and each time, more lives were poured into its construction. It had become more than a ship. It was a crucible in which the last hopes of the Accord burned. When the final armor plates were welded, when the last shield generator came online, when the first pulse of the experimental lance hummed through its core, humanity wept as though at a funeral and a birth all at once. The Eclipse was colossal, dwarfing even the Ironclads. It carried batteries of railguns, banks of torpedoes, shield projectors that dwarfed those of the bulwarks. But its heart was its singular weapon, a particle lance scavenged from broken Elythian wreckage and twisted into something new, something human. It was an abomination of stolen science and desperate engineering, yet it worked. The Elythians came for it the day it was declared operational. Perhaps they had feared what it represented. Perhaps they had simply sought to break the last spine of Terran resistance. A fleet descended upon Mars, cruisers, escorts, carriers spilling forth drone swarms. The Accord had no choice. The Eclipse, barely tested, was ordered into battle. The fleets clashed in the red shadow of Mars. Aegis frigates swarmed the flanks, throwing themselves into suicide runs that tore gaps in the Elythian screens. Hammerfalls darted in, striking exposed escorts before retreating into the chaos. Ironclads held the center, their guns hammering a steady rhythm as they shielded the approaches to Mars. Above them all loomed the Eclipse. The Elythians struck first, lances searing into its shields. The Eclipse shook, its armor plates glowing with the heat of the onslaught. For a moment, it seemed that humanity's Titan would die in its cradle. Then, its lance fired. The beam split the void, a pillar of white light, brighter than any star. It struck an Elythian cruiser, and the ship ceased to exist, torn apart in a single instant. Even the debris was vaporized. Silence fell across the battlefield, as if even war itself had paused in awe. The Elythians faltered. Humanity roared. Again, the Eclipse fired, and another cruiser vanished. Its escorts broke formation, uncertain for the first time. The Terran fleet surged forward, seizing the moment. Frigates and destroyers pressed the attack, ironclads driving their rail slugs into faltering shields. The Elythians, who had never known defeat in this system, retreated. Mars was saved. The Eclipse lived, and with it, a new chapter began. But victory was a double-edged gift. The footage of the battle was broadcast across Earth and the colonies, and while humanity rejoiced, others in the galaxy looked on with unease. For centuries, the Accord had been a voice of peace, a mediator, a shield against war. Now, it had forged a weapon to rival anything the stars had ever seen. The message was clear. Humanity had been broken, reshaped, reforged into iron. And iron did not negotiate. In the aftermath, The Accord's leaders gathered in what had once been a ceremonial chamber of peace on Earth. The walls still bore the murals of treaties signed, of civilizations united, but the light that filtered through the chamber's high windows was cold, and the faces within were harder than stone. They no longer spoke of treaties. They spoke of shipyards, of production quotas, of the need to expand the fleet and push the war beyond the Sol system. The Utopia was gone. What remained was a civilization scarred and burning, bound together not by ideals of harmony, but by necessity, vengeance, and the knowledge that survival demanded strength. And above Mars, the Eclipse drifted silently, a god of war born from desperation, its lance still glowing faintly from the fire it had unleashed. To some, it was humanity's salvation. To others, it was a harbinger of what they had become. For in the ashes of Utopia, something new had risen, and the galaxy would never again look at Earth the same way.